It's hard to imagine British politics getting even more tumultuous, but it has this week. 9 Labour MPs left Labour, and the reasons they've given include anti-Semitism, anti-Jewish racism and criticism of the leadership. 3 Conservative MPs have also left their party, and one of the main uniting factors in this new independent group of MPs is also a call for a new Brexit referendum. Dr. Richard Johnson is a lecturer in politics from Lancaster University, and he's written about the history of the Labour Party. Good morning, Dr. Johnson.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for joining us. Why has this issue of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party kept coming to the forefront, do you think?
Well, I think part of it has to do with a long-standing debate in the British left about the Israel-Palestine question. And although that debate could be conducted in a legitimate way about valid criticisms of the Israeli government's conduct in the West Bank or Gaza, for example, I think what's happened is that debate, which has become highly factionalised in the Labour Party, has allowed certain anti-Semitic tropes to become part of that dialogue in a way which is very unhelpful and very damaging for the Labour Party.
And how big an issue is this for those MPs who've left? Do you think it's the driving issue, or is there much more going on?
I think that if you look at the Labour MPs who've left this week, there are a variety of factors. Brexit has certainly been an issue for some. I think a general discontent with Jeremy Corbyn's leadership on ideological grounds has been part of it. But certainly for some Labour MPs like Luciana Berger and Ian Austin, who come from a Jewish background, this has been at the forefront for them. And I think that, there's talk about other Labour MPs leaving in the days to come, who might also be motivated by this particular question. And so it's a question that the Labour leadership needs to take seriously.
Has the Labour Party ever faced accusations of anti-Jewish feeling like this before?
There's always been a mix in the Labour Party. I mean, there are certainly people like Harold Wilson, who was viewed as very staunchly pro-Israel. There's a forest named after him in Israel. It was once said that Wilson, the only thing that he was actually dogmatic about was Israel, that he was flexible on all other questions, including the European question. But there have also been senior Labour figures who have indulged in a kind of conspiratorial tone when they talk about Israel and Jews. And for example, Ernest Bevin, Clement Attlee's foreign secretary, used to make comments about Jewish bankers and Jewish capitalists, which certainly reflected a kind of anti-Semitic conspiracy, which has always been present in some segments of the left.
Some say that the leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, hasn't taken the issue seriously. How true do you think that is?
Well, clearly, from the perspective of the MPs who have left over this issue, not seriously enough. There have been efforts to try and address this, but I think that, a lot of people viewed, for example, the Chakrabarti review into anti-Semitism in the Labour Party as insufficient. The way that review was rolled out only further intensified some of the questions about anti-Semitism and poor treatment of Jewish members in the Labour Party. Certainly not a universal view within the Labour Party, but I think that, when you hear people like Margaret Hodge, who's a very prominent Labour MP, and people are sort of saying that she's looking at her future in the party. She comes from a Jewish background. Her family came here as refugees. That the Labour leadership probably needs to do more to tackle this to prevent further defections.
Now, you've spoken a little bit about the role of the Israel-Palestine dialogue in all of this. Is there a confusion between being anti-Israel or even critical of Israel and anti-Semitic? Because they're not the same thing, are they?
No, they're not the same thing, but I think that what's happened is that there's been a theme on the left since the 1980s, which is to portray Israel as a racist project in itself, which raises questions of hypocrisy, that the notion that there can't be a Jewish state, but there can be Christian states or Muslim states. And I think that means that people who view themselves as anti-racist and then also deeply anti-Israel don't even realize that they're necessarily indulging in anti-Semitic or possibly racist tropes, because they wouldn't see themselves as racist. I think it's fair to say that people like Jeremy Corbyn might fit to some extent in that camp.
I think that's a really helpful way of unpacking it, actually. I think from within the Jewish community, there's often a sense of, if you are calling for the destruction of the state of Israel, you may not think of yourself as anti-Semitic, but you're calling for the destruction of the only Jewish state and for the destruction of Jews, essentially. And how can that not be anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic? And it's the use of sort of the extremes of the language become very scary. Overall, in the long term, how damaging do you think all of this is to the Labour Party?
Well, I think that if it doesn't get to grips with this and more MPs leave over it, then I think it could be damaging. I mean, certainly the Labour Party, used to be the home for British Jews. The Labour Party, in the early years of after the Second World War, it was the majority of Jews voted Labour. But certainly since the 1980s, that hasn't been the case, and Labour seems to be doing even worse among that community. It's obviously not a large community, but it's I think it's a cause for Labour to think about its identity and a champion of the underdog, and whether that's something that Labour can be satisfied with.
And do you think that this splitting, these multiple voices now that we're starting to hear, will it impact at all on the Brexit process? Does it change the votes and the way they're going? Does it impact on Theresa May at all?
I don't think it affects the parliamentary arithmetic on Brexit, because I think that the MPs who have left, particularly those who have left over Brexit, they were anti-Brexit before and they're still anti-Brexit now. And I thought it was interesting that Ian Austin, who left over the anti-Semitism question at the end of this week, didn't join Chuka Umunna's group, partly because he believes in implementing the Leave vote. He represents a very strongly Leave Labour constituency. So I don't actually think that in terms of the actual parliamentary maths over Brexit, that this question impacts on that.
Wonderful. Dr. Richard Johnson, it's been really enlightening to hear from you this morning on what's been going on in politics this week. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.